Good morning. We have a lot to get through, so I need a sense of whether we have a quorum. And it does look like we have enough people here. All right, so welcome to this meeting of the board of the Ingen Corporation held here at DinoSauJS. I've spoken to many of you, but for others, is that not working? That's sad. Okay, no, we're good. Good. No chaos here. It's okay. It's a blank slide. It's all good. Welcome to the meeting of the board held here. I've spoken to many of you, but for others, my name is Hayley Denbraver, and I've been hired to analyze the failures that occurred during the incident at Isla Nublar. So I know you all are currently going through a rough time, perhaps, and that there's uncertainty about the project moving forward, and that's why I'm here. I was hired to review the recent incident at Isla Nublar, catalog the points of failure, and suggest next steps for the project. So, first, we're going to review the events of the weekend so we can all be working from the same page. Second, I'm going to dive into the flaws within our software design workflow. This isn't going to be about the failures within the software itself, but rather the failures within our practice of software engineering. Third, we're going to discuss engineering ethics and how ethical breaches compromised our project. And finally, I'm going to cover the idea of chaos engineering and suggest some steps we could take to build a more resilient Jurassic Park. Now first, I really want us to be on the same page with respect to the events of the weekend, so we're going to do a quick review now. So, show of hands. Can you raise your hand if you've read the written account of Jurassic Park? Okay, that's great. What about those who viewed the video footage? Okay, more, good. All right, that helps. For those who are familiar with both, they can attest that there are a number of discrepancies between the two accounts. And from my research, it's clear to me that the video footage provides the more accurate account, so that's what we're going to work with. So first, let's meet our consultants. Dr. Grant is a paleontologist, and he works with his postdoc, Dr. Sadler, who's a paleobotanist. Dr. Ian Malcolm has a PhD in mathematics and is an expert in something called chaos theory. He details this as the idea that systems are complex and likely to behave in an unpredictable way when even a small change or flaw is introduced. Relevant staff members include John Hammond, who is the creator of our park, Dennis Nedry, who was the lead software developer for Jurassic Park, Dr. Wu, who's the head scientist, Robert Muldoon, who was our game warden, John Arnold, who was the chief engineer, and Donald Gennaro, who was our chief counsel. All right, so now that we know the team, let's discuss the events. After a construction worker was killed in an accident, Grant, Sadler, and Malcolm were brought to the park to render their professional opinions. Malcolm was aware of the nature of the park from the beginning and was consistently against the project. He was convinced that the park would never work because of chaos theory, but we'll get into more of that later. So Grant and Sadler were unaware of the true nature of the park, but they were initially surprised and delighted by the dinosaurs. I know I would be too. Now, while this visit is taking place, Dennis Nedry was working on site to take care of some software bugs. We unfortunately have since learned that he was unhappy with the terms of his contract. A while back, he was approached by a competitor who wanted to open a similar park, but wasn't above bribing Nedry to steal some embryos, to which Nedry agreed. During the park visit, there was a significant storm. While our people were out on a tour, a number of systems went down, some the result of the storm, and others because Nedry had purposefully brought them down in order to execute his plans. Most notably, the electric fences went down. Now, this is where dinosaur-induced chaos ensued. Nedry died while trying to get the embryos to his handler and was not able to resolve either the purposeful software vulnerabilities he included to execute his plan or the multitude of software bugs that were there anyway. Grant discovered that the dinosaurs had been breeding, even though this was supposed to be impossible, because all the dinosaurs are female. It happened because Dr. Wu used frog DNA to fill in holes in the genetic code. Certain species of frogs can change sex when in a single-sex environment in order to continue the species, or as Malcolm puts it, life finds a way. While Grant and others were evading raptors, Dr. Sadler, with the help of Muldoon and Arnold, was able to manually reboot the power, and Hammond's granddaughter was able to get the computer up and running again because she knows Unix. This success came at a high cost because both Muldoon and Arnold were lost in that effort. And they weren't the only ones. During the incident, we lost Nedry, Muldoon, Arnold, and Gennaro, and there were many close calls. God, we have a lot of hiring to do. Check the website, tell your friends. The remaining team members with various injuries and traumas were able to escape once the storm had cleared and the T-Rex and the Velociraptors were keeping each other busy. And this brings the relevant events to a close. All right, so now that we're all on the same page, I want to talk about software engineering at Jurassic Park. John Hammond claims that he spared no expense in the creation of this park. And this is an outright fabrication. Okay, the resort is luxurious, yes, and genetic engineering is expensive. But I've determined through my research that we dropped the ball in terms of software. Let's explore some of the pitfalls. In this section, I'm going to be nice to Nedry, but I have harsh words for him later. From the evidence that I have gathered, it is clear that Nedry did not know he was writing software for a dinosaur park. Instead, I discovered the requirements that he had been given included vague instructions like dispense food at pre-recorded times, write software to monitor a series of electric fences, write software to visually scan the area and report back. And Nedry figured out what the software was for eventually, and he had his suspicion confirmed by our competitors. But he really should have been in from the first. And if we did not trust him to be in from the first, then we should have hired someone else. Hammond was trying to be competitive by keeping his plans under wraps, but he was setting himself up for failure by not giving the software development team critical information. In addition to not telling Nedry what the software is for, an unrealistic timeline was enforced. There's scope creep, insufficient budgeting. Nedry tried to get more money to fix the problems, but was threatened with retaliation. And when the scope creeps and the budget is blown, how much testing do you think happens? And what critical features do you think are deemed good enough? Now, all code has bugs, and all code has problems. And everyone has a share of their flaws, and there isn't a perfect. But not perfect code is a far cry from poorly designed, poorly documented, untested code running in a production environment with velociraptors. All right, so it's clear that we didn't approach the design of Jurassic Park in a way to best ensure the success and the safety of the project. But I also want to discuss the ethical breaches that occurred because they're undoubtedly a cause of the problem as well. Okay, who here has heard of the Hippocratic Oath? Yeah, okay, most, good. It's a pledge doctors give, and it says, first do no harm. Who here has heard of doctors, lawyers, or engineers losing their licenses for unethical behavior? Yeah, that happens too. The reason that happens is that doctors, lawyers, and engineers are accountable for their professional behavior in order to protect the people that they serve. Certain aspects of the conception and design of Jurassic Park caused a lot of harm to the public, and it should be viewed as a failing in ethical practice. Nedry's clearly guilty of unethical behavior. He introduced flaws into the system to exploit for his own personal gain. He accepted bribes to steal another's property. He purposefully wrote his code so that it would be difficult for someone else to debug and reboot and therefore expose his malfeasance. What he did was illegal, immoral, unethical, and directly led to the deaths of himself and others. And I think it would be easy to focus on Nedry's shortcomings because he's a contractor and he's not part of our main org chart and he's also dead. But I can't let Ingen off the hook. If we think of breaches of engineering ethics to only include things like sabotage and bribery, we miss a larger picture. Malcolm, our infuriating and unapologetic consultant, was right. We thought about whether we could create this park, and we never considered whether we should. Malcolm was of the opinion that the park could never be safe. And while we could debate the merit of that position, it is clear that the potential for harm was much higher than originally portrayed. And in interest of financial gain, corners were cut that resulted in decreased safety, and that's unacceptable. Ethical breaches have consequences. In our case, they resulted in a handful of deaths, other injuries and trauma, and financial loss to multiple parties. And it could have been a lot worse. We got lucky. I mentioned at the start that I have an interest in engineering ethics. It's true, and I could tell you that it comes from inside my beautiful heart and pristine soul, but it isn't really the case. I'm interested in engineering ethics because I'm interested in resilient software systems. Ethical breaches have the capacity to compromise a system, and that is precisely what happened here, both with respect to Nedry and with respect to Ingen. Ethical breaches are a source of chaos. They're unexpected, and their results are unpredictable. Training in and the application of engineering ethics should never be considered what our industry sometimes calls soft skills, but rather they should be viewed as something that have the capacity to make or break your system. My final point of discussion is chaos engineering. As we have seen, Ingen's system experienced a high degree of chaos in the form of unethical behavior, fragile system design, and simple bad luck. The storm compounded problems, for instance. If the board decides to move ahead with rebuilding and reinvesting in the park, I believe that chaos engineering should be employed as part of the system design. But what is chaos engineering? Well, chaos engineering is the practice of breaking your system on purpose, observing how the failure propagates through the system, and documenting how the team was able to respond to the problem. This is essentially what happened at Isla Nublar, minus the on-purpose part. So how do we approach this? First recommendation, break things on purpose, but don't start with prod. Break a dev instance, see what happens, how your team responds. Release a hypothetical velociraptor, not a real one. Second recommendation is to start small and iterate. Break something small, make a prediction of what will happen, and see what actually does. Resolve the incident and refactor to prevent the propagation of the failure that was observed. Then break something else and repeat. Train your staff on incident response so they aren't scrambling to figure out how to turn the generator on or say how to reboot the electric fence. A final point to provide perspective. Another term for chaos engineering is failure injection. It might seem weird to think of something that includes the word failure as a positive thing. So if that trips you up, focus on the word injection and think of chaos engineering as a vaccine. Something bad, viral proteins, dead or attenuated viruses, or a software bug, is injected into a supposedly healthy system. The system responds, addresses the issue, and retains the ability to address the problem when it's encountered again. It becomes stronger by being exposed. Upon reviewing the events, it became very important to me to talk both about engineering ethics and chaos. I really think that these ideas reinforce each other, especially for systems that are so critical. It could be argued that we have an ethical responsibility to build a resilient system when the human cost of failure is so high. Additionally, the ethical practice of software engineering removes an element of chaos from the system. Things may still go wrong, but from mistake, not malice. It's my opinion that any further progress on Jurassic Park should go forward with these two ideas as its base, or it shouldn't go forward at all. So how do we use these ideas to build a better park? Well, I want to close my talk with the following recommendations. Recommendation number 1, appropriately budget resources to software design and testing. Recommendation number 2, increase transparency between stakeholders. No surprises. Recommendation 3, hire professionals you can trust. Listen to them and make sure they have the necessary resources. And hire enough people. Don't discount your staff. Jurassic Park had initially been designed not to require a lot of people, but better software, automated software, it doesn't negate your need for a well-trained, capable staff to respond to incidents. Recommendation 4, use the principles of chaos engineering to refine your design before there are actual velociraptors running around. And finally, maybe just don't. As Malcolm puts it, this park might have been doomed from the start. The stakes are too high and nature is too complex. Ask yourself whether you should, not just whether you can. All right, it's time to call the question. How many are in favor of reinvesting in Jurassic Park? I want to see a show of hands. Okay, fair enough. How many want to kill the project? Okay, that was pretty evenly split, but it seems like there was slightly more restart. So we're gonna go with that. The project will be restarted. May God have mercy. So thank you so much. If you'll allow me a minute, I want to address you as myself and not in character. Thank you to the DinosaurJS team for having me and my talk to the conference. It was a pleasure. My real job, I don't actually work for Ingen, is as a developer advocate at Sneak. It's my job to get feedback from devs and to learn about the challenges that they face and to help them out. So if you ever want to talk open source and security, please don't hesitate to drop me a line at the email address on the screen or on my Twitter. I'll also be posting these slides on that Twitter account fairly soon, so you can check that out if you're interested. And finally, a short shout out, if anyone's interested in learning more about security, you can join a vendor-neutral security education-focused community that I help run. It's called the Secure Developer, and we do virtual events, and we have a Slack group. That's a lot of fun. So thanks again, and remember, life finds a way.
So, in terms of executing, we had, you talked about, how to, get started with chaos engineering, but for a lot of, and I'm sure a lot of us have had this situation where, we don't put, either we or leadership does not put enough time into, handling failures or even just testing in general. How do you make the case to somebody in charge?
So it's interesting, and I think about this a lot as well because my job intersects with security. And there are certain types of problems that people don't notice or think about the issue until something goes wrong. And so you have to purposefully intervene and decide to proactively address these things. And that's a hard sell because I think sometimes, you want to know the business value of something. The higher ups want to know that their team is like doing work that is making money, right? But the thing is you really have to understand the cost of failure. And that's hard. I don't think I have a full answer. But one thing I would say is that I think we need to learn how to talk to other teams better. So being able to discuss things like this with product, with higher ups, C-suite, different business people is really important. And I think sometimes having these conversations, having any conversation is kind of seen as a soft skill, or like you kind of want to put on your headphones and head down and you're coding. But it's not that way. It does have business value, and we need to learn as devs how to have those conversations.
Yeah, I agree. I came across one of your blog posts about how you should reuse your talks. And you were talking, and I noticed that you mentioned right when I introduced you that you said this talk was from like a previous talk. You want to talk a little bit about the evolution? Like you touched that on your blog post a little bit.
Sure. Yeah. So a part of my day job now is to go to events like this and to give talks, and it would just be way too overwhelming to do a new one every time. So I have talks I like to iterate, and it's kind of a similar process to code in a way. Like you have a minimal viable product, like, okay, I do have slides, like I am covering the things that I'm supposed to cover, but time and experience will show you kind of like what needs to be tweaked a little, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I agree. So do you want to talk a little bit about the evolution of this talk? Like what did you add in that you took out? Evolution, I got a pun there. How did it grow, over time?
Well, so when I first submitted the talk, I wasn't sure I would do it in character, but I decided like, what the heck? And I'm just like, okay, I'm doing it in character, and it was a small audience. Like, if it didn't go well, that's okay. Like, I'll live. No one has died from public speaking, just FYI. And it went well. And so I've iterated from there, including changing the title to give more of a surprise, but that's okay.
Oh, good. So you want to tell us about like just the process of like, you just got like the inspiration? Like, were you just watching like your Jurassic Park one day?
No, so Jurassic Park is my favorite book in the world because I'm an enormous nerd, and I really, really like tech conferences, but the talks I value have an element of storytelling, and so my love for that kind of talk just paired really well with this kind of subject. Whenever I give a talk, I try to relate technical information, but in the end, I want people to leave remembering the talk and being excited about their job and maybe having a nugget of something to take away. And I try to do that with storytelling.
Oh, great. So I have just one other question here, but before, I'm just gonna also check Twitter and just double check and see how we're doing on there. See if we do have a question here. Okay. So do you have any thoughts on introducing chaos in production environments?
Oh, I think there's a place for that for sure. But if your team is taking the first steps into chaos engineering, I think it makes a lot of sense to start with dev. Yes, I do think there's a place for that.
Okay, thank you for that question, Brandon, wherever you are. And then I have another question here. That's not a question, just a comment. I'll just read it here since I already identified it from Vicky. She said, your talk about chaos engineering and system resilience using Jurassic Park as a sample incident was absolutely fantastic. So,
well, thank you.
Yes. Awesome. So, in terms of you talked about like how you do a lot with just like ethics. How do you that's something that I'm not very familiar with, and I think a lot of developers
I have an interesting story about that, actually.
Yeah, so tell us a little about
that. Who here is a career switcher? Anyone? Yeah, so me too. All right. And my first job out of college was actually as a civil engineer. And you work for a while, you take an enormous test, and then you're licensed. So I have a stamp with my name on it. And if I stamp something that is sketchy, that can come back to bite me. And so I have this perspective of someone who was held accountable to a degree in that job that really generally developers aren't. And so I really like to do the ethics talks because it gets people thinking about like, what does my code mean for the end user? And am I compromising them in some way that's unacceptable? And I think generally we like to move fast and break things. And I think there's a place for that, but I think it's also a conversation we need to have about like what impact does our code have on someone? Just because we never meet them or we don't see them doesn't mean that they're not there.
Right. So my last question that I have is, if I was in front of my my editor today, what is one thing that I could do to just care more about ethics as an engineer?
So I think one thing you could do is just to take a second and pause and ask yourself questions. And just like, what is this? Is there something about my design that I haven't thought about that could have an unintended consequence? I think something that's also really important is, I have a perspective as a white woman that might be different than my husband's perspective as a white male dev, but there are things that I'm not necessarily, aren't necessarily a danger or a problem for me, but I need to be aware of them because I don't want to build something that's going to hurt someone else, algorithms that racially profile or things like that. So I think building a team that's diverse and has diverse perspectives can 100% help with that.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Hayley.
Yeah, thank you guys.